Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais with another exclusive episode for premium members of the Yakking Show. So, if you're watching this in our general audience, you want to get the whole show, you've got to become a premium member. First off, let me introduce co-host Kathleen. Hi, Kathleen. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you so much. And thank you also very much for tuning in. We have interesting expert guests on this show, which we absolutely love. And today is absolutely no exception. We have the great privilege of welcoming back Dr. Michael Solomon. Dr. Michael Solomon is a professor of marketing and an expert on consumer behavior. He's also the author of the most widely read book on consumer behavior in the world, entitled Buying, Having, and Being. And if you haven't seen his initial interview, I would urge you to please go and watch that initial interview. I think you will find it incredibly interesting. And Peter, we will have that in that link in the comment section. Is that right?
Most definitely we will. Yep.
Well, welcome, Michael. How are you today?
Kathleen, thanks so much for having me on again. It's great to see you both.
Well, now, Michael, you have a mantra, and the mantra is we don't buy things because of what they do. We buy them because of what they mean. Can you please explain that to us?
Yeah, that's kind of gets to the heart of everything that I do. The reason I went into this crazy field is that I'm fascinated by the idea that everyday objects have incredible significance in our lives. It's not just the hugely expensive watch or sports car or something like that. Everyday objects play a huge role in defining to other people who we are, who we want to be, and also defining to ourselves. So really, a lot of what we look at in consumer behavior is trying to understand what we call the deep meanings of brands. And many of your listeners, anyone who's trying to sell a product or service of any kind has a brand, or if you're an individual, you have your own personal brand. And, I think the mistake that many companies make is they focus on the functionality rather than on the symbolic or emotional meaning of some of these products. And the reality is, fortunately, in many cases, certainly not all, but in many cases today, the likelihood is that most of the options you're looking at are probably going to work reasonably well. What differentiates one from the rest of the herd, I think, is the story behind it. And if you look at just about any brand category, and certainly in the B2C or business to consumer space, but B2B as well, you'll see that the brands that are the most successful are not the ones that just work well. Now, they all have to work, of course, but they go the extra yard because they're supplying you not only with functionality, but they're filling in part of the story of your life. And so when I say that people don't buy things because of what they mean, because of what they do, they buy them because of what they mean. I mean that literally. In that we're each of us is actively choosing brands, products, services, companies, ideas that become a part of who we are and how we present ourselves to others. So it's an incredibly important issue. And I can tell you, after 40 years of teaching MBAs and other marketing executives and so on, many of them just don't seem to get it because they want to focus on that technical differentiator rather than also thinking about what does your product or service actually mean to the people who consume it.
Mm-hmm. That is so true, isn't it? So just an extension of that one. How well does brand loyalty transfer from generations, from father to son, mother to daughter? Because I know of friends, for instance, who would buy a Ford pickup because their father had one and they grew up all their life with a Ford pickup and the family drove Ford pickups. So that seems to me to be stronger than anything Ford is going to do right now, right?
Probably, if there's some kind of an emotional attachment, which often can be nostalgia, right? Remembering riding in your grandfather in the old Ford truck or something like that. The only exception would be, ironically, it can also just be out of habit, because for someone who's not very interested in the category, they're going to look for what we call heuristics or shortcuts to make the process a little less painful. And so one of those we call it a rule of thumb. A rule of thumb is buy what my parents bought. And you'll see this, for example, with college students. I see this a lot when they're living on their own for the first time and they're setting up an apartment. God knows what that's going to look like. But if you go into the pantry, my guess is often you'll find the same basic brands, the sugar and the flour and so on, that was in their houses when they grew up. Right, so that's often a start. Now, that doesn't mean that Ford or one of these companies has a lock on you for life. The challenge is to understand the emotional story that Ford, for example, is telling. Sure. And perhaps tell another one that's more compelling in some way. But understanding that there is a story,
Yeah, absolutely.
So Michael, Kathleen? From a company standpoint, how would they go about attributing meaning to their product?
Well, if you've got a few hours, I can give you some answers. I talk about this in my course on customer engagement. That's about 6 hours. There are many ways to do it. The important thing is to recognize that you need to do it, and that's the first step that many companies haven't taken yet. But I like to think about it in terms of the very simple and basic model of engagement that advertisers have used for decades, and that's called the AIDA model, AIDA, which means awareness, interest, desire, and action. And it's just a simple reminder, and it's good for your audience maybe just to make a little sketch of that. You don't sell a product immediately. When someone learns of the product, they're not going to learn of your product and immediately buy it. In most cases, they're going to go through a process where they're going to become hopefully more and more engaged with different aspects of their minds. At first it's just going to be simple novelty. Let's say, oh, that looks different, I wonder what that is. But when you get to the point of purchase, it's often after what can be a fairly lengthy process of multiple touches with the customer. 5 to 7 is often a rule of thumb before they're going to buy anything. They have to become more invested in what you're doing. So again, it can't be just functionality. It has to be a story, and it has to be a story that resonates with something that's going on in their lives. And I have a lot of different examples of that. I even have a little audit on my website that people can download. Different routes to engagement. And if you look at successful companies, the usual suspects like Starbucks and Lululemon and Nike and Apple and so on, each of those is taking a certain route to engagement, what we call resonance, where the brand really becomes a part of who you are. So it's understanding what aspect of that person perhaps you might mesh with. So, for example, I've done some work with CrossFit. You may be familiar with all those. Believe me, I didn't do CrossFit, as you can tell. But all these guys, these men and women who are into this, and the functionality there, I guess, is putting on big muscles, right? But the fact is that CrossFit is more like a sense of community, a sense of family, where the members encourage one another, et cetera. That's the basis of the CrossFit brand. So just as an example, if you're trying to sell weightlifting equipment, you need to sell more than just how many pounds the barbell is. You need to sell the experience that people are going to have in perhaps altering their lives by losing weight or gaining muscle or doing all the other things we can do with products.
So just picking up on that one, Apple, one that comes to mind, they managed to get the desire to the desire stage very quickly, very often before the new iPhone is even on the market, right? You've got people wanting it before the thing is launched, before they know what it's going to cost. So they're really experts on that one. So Michael, talk about your course a little more, your Engage course. I know we've both had a good look at it, and It's I think you've got it in 6 modules. Is that correct? Do you want to walk our audience through your course?
Well, sure. Yeah, it's as I said, it's about 6 hours of content, but basically what I'm doing is taking about 50 years of research on consumer behavior, both academic research and also some proprietary research, and applying that to all of the different ways that we can try to ramp up engagement. And again, the actual course, the framework I use is that very basic AIDA model. And what I do is I walk the learner through the course. We start at the most superficial level of awareness, which is very important. No one's going to buy your product if they're not aware of it. But they're also not going to buy your product just because they're aware of it. And so as we make our way through the model, what I do is to show how along different dimensions, there are a variety of strategies and tactics that we can use that have been demonstrated to work. Many of them have been buried in the pages of journals for many years, but we know a lot about how people respond to offers and how they learn about brands, how they make decisions, the incredible impact of other people and of the culture that you live in, et cetera. There are many different factors that impact this. I teach at the undergrad and graduate levels. I teach an entire semester course on consumer behavior. So we don't quite go into that detail, but what I tried to do is to take out the "what does it matter to me" questions and focus on those. So it's not like a long theoretical lecture by a professor. Don't panic. There is a little bit of background, but it's all with an eye toward, well, how can I apply this on Monday morning? And so by the time we reach the end of the course, hopefully we have created what I like to call brand fanatics. People who are absolutely bonkers about a brand, again, not just because it does what it's supposed to do, that's a good thing, but because it plays an important role in telling us something about ourselves and how we express our identities in society.
So here's one that again occurred to me while you were talking. There's several product categories where the buyer is not necessarily the consumer. The one that immediately comes to mind is men's underwear. And I read somewhere that something like 60% of adult men's underwear is bought by their female partner, spouse, girlfriend, or whatever. That may or may not be correct, but a significant amount, and I know from several of my mates that they don't even know what brand of underwear they're getting because their wife sorts it out. Right? So, no, seriously. So now we have yet another dimension to consider in marketing, and this applies very often to B2B marketing, where the decision maker and the buyer is not the consumer. So you not only have to motivate the consumer, or the wearer. In the case of underwear, you've got to motivate the person who's spending the money to buy it, right? So, how do you address that one?
Well, it's amazing that you mentioned that question, because I've actually, back in quite some time ago, I did a lot of writing on that topic, because it's incredibly important to understand that in so many decision situations, as you say, the end consumer is not really weighing the options the way we think of when you go to a store and you look at the options. And so I actually published an article in, 1987, I think it was, on what I call the surrogate consumer.
Okay, yeah.
Surrogate consumer is someone who makes decisions on behalf of someone else. Now, when you think about it, that covers, you mentioned B2B, but B2C as well. So, anything from, well, obviously, let's say a physician who is making, is deciding what drugs the patient's gonna take, or the nurse. But expand that to other areas, and you'll see it's more common than you think. Stockbrokers, real estate agents, stylists, fashion stylists. I used to do a lot of work with professional wardrobe consultants. That was a big thing for a while.
Right.
And again, and that's purely B2C. These are people who pay someone else to come into their closet and literally, strip out their closet and redo it. And I love that example, because it shows you that these are usually quite important decisions that we're delegating. Your stockbroker is responsible for your retirement, but you say, okay, you're the expert. I will defer to you. And yet so few marketers have figured this out and have identified those intermediaries in the channel that I call surrogates and target messages to them in addition to or even rather than the end consumer, because typically the end consumer is going to, the job of that intermediary is to be a curator, which is tremendously important today. That's what influencers do, by the way. Their job is to take what I tell my students, that one of the biggest problems we face in a Western society today, ironically, is not that we don't have enough choices. It's that we have too many choices. People are overwhelmed with all those choices. And so anyone who has the ability to narrow them down and curate them and say to you, well, there's 1,000 that I looked at, but here's the 5 that I think are best for you. That is where there's value added in the channel. And so these surrogates Peter, are absolutely, not only very important, but a lot of people don't think about them. So I'm really delighted you raised that question.
All right. Sorry, Kathleen, I'm just going to carry on this one. There's another angle to this as well. I don't know what you would call them, and that's particularly with stuff that's consumed by children that the parents pay for, but very often the children will influence them. So take breakfast cereals. You could have a breakfast cereal manufacturer that promotes how healthy the food is for the child. It's got all the vitamins, it's got this, it's got that. It's not going to give them tooth decay, but the kids likes it because it tastes good, or it has a toy in it, or whatever. So they could be promoting it to the parent, but the decision's made by the child for totally different reasons. So there's another angle.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, both B2B, it's been more widely studied in B2B, but where you have what's called a buying center, and a buying center is not a physical location. It's the group of people who are entrusted to make big decisions, replacing the computer system or something like that. Now, when you dig into that, you realize that people in a buying center, and this is true for families as well, play different roles. So one of the roles is called the gatekeeper, and that's the person who narrows down that information we were talking about. But there are influencers and deciders, and so it could be. I learned very early on in business that the most important person to get to know and to get on the good side of is the secretary to the CEO.
Yeah,
because they usually run the business, right? And so they are the gatekeeper. A lot of people don't understand that and will just try to barrel over those people because they think they're not part of the decision, and they're very, very wrong. And you do the same thing in families. You've got, you mentioned breakfast cereals. Let's say you're in the travel business. I mean, an incredible amount of travel decisions are made by the children.
Yes.
Not by the. So if you're only targeting the adults, you're missing out on the main influencer.
That's right. And I'm glad you brought up secretaries, because I'm old enough to remember when secretaries were true gatekeepers. And I know that if you tried to ride over the secretary, not only did you risk not getting to the CEO, but you risk, when you did get to him, the secretary was coming in after you and putting in a bad word about how rude you were. Oh, you didn't follow the rule. Oh, yeah, I've seen that happen a few times. Okay. So, yeah, very important. Kathleen, back to you.
Well, Michael, you already talked a little bit about the AIDA model. So we're looking at awareness, interest, desire, and action. But I was wondering if maybe you could take us, I know you have a whole course on this, but perhaps you can give us a little bit of an abbreviated version of each of those for us and some examples.
Yes, I guess I can do that. So let's start with awareness. What does it take to make someone become aware of you? Now if you think about, we're coming up here in the States on a political season again. One just ended. If you're a new candidate, if you're running for office and no one knows you, what's the most important thing strategically is just to build name recognition, right? Just to get people to become aware. Oh, I've seen that name on bumper stickers. Now, you may not know what that person stands for, but at least now they're kind of an entrant into the race, if you will. And so how can you, at that very basic level, what do you do to get noticed? And here we can, for example, focus on some of the very basic perceptual processes, the way our brains work to help us to distinguish some things from others using our senses. Obviously, our visual sense, But one very important thing is to remember that the visual channel is very, very crowded. Everybody thinks they're going to send their message visually, you know, with a clever ad or a beautiful presenter, whatever it is. And so in the course, I do spend some time talking about what we call sensory marketing, which means using, in addition to vision, using the other senses to break through that clutter. For example, smells and textures and so on, that help to give your brand, even at this basic level, a unique identity. And you see a number of brands ranging from a lot of hotels, for example, will have a signature scent. So no matter where you are in the world, if you're in X hotel, there will be part of that brand that is olfactory, and that is intended to remind you of where you are. So again, at that basic level, I'm kind of cherry picking a few examples. There are other things we talk about as well. But at that beginning level, you know, understanding how our brains function, just to what are some of the simple tricks we can do to make ourselves stand out in a crowded field. That's essential, especially when you realize that. And maybe I'm giving away the answer because I think I asked this in the course, but you know, when we think about how many commercial messages we're exposed to in a single day, the answer is close to 5,000. And people will say, "There's no way I've been in front of 5,000 messages," and well, maybe you haven't, but you probably have. It's just that you didn't notice 950 of them. So already those 4,950 messages are lost. Money is wasted. So again, at that basic level, you know, getting yourself noticed in some way, you know, and then when you get to interest, how do you get people interested in something? Well, let's see. The basic determination we always make when we buy something is how much risk will be involved in buying this. There's always a risk associated with trying something new. As anybody who's tried to, you know, move a customer from one brand to theirs understands, we have a lot of built-in resistance there.
Right.
And so, you know, anything that you can do to reduce risk, it might be financial risk, it may be social risk, like, will people laugh at me if I wear this, you know? So assuring people that the risk is far outweighed by the potential rewards of buying that product. And, you know, you can build interest in a lot of ways in terms of your messaging, of course. So, you know, one of the things I recommend in the course is to focus on what we call spectacles or guerrilla marketing, getting attention by doing something unexpected. You know, that's actually an extension of the awareness stage where you have to do something unexpected with your colors and your sounds and so on. But here you're doing maybe something unexpected behaviorally. You're doing a little, you know, if you know what guerrilla marketing is, it means to surprise people. It doesn't mean monkeys. It means the other kind, like guerrilla warfare, surprising people where they're not expecting you. And so doing some kind of, you know, having street art on the sidewalk that has your logo on it, or posters in public bathrooms and things like that. You know, there are many, many ways to do that, but you got to do something to jolt people out of there every day, because the thing is that we become so, you know, first of all, we're looking at our phones constantly. You know, at least my students are. And so we need jolts to just get us out of our reverie and look up and say, "Oh, that's interesting. That's different. I want to know more about that." You know, that just makes me curious. People want to be entertained. They want to learn things. And so that's one way that you can create interest. Excuse me. Desire, you know, that's where it starts to get interesting, because now you're starting to say that your brand, I desire it because it's something that I need or really want to tell a part of my life story. I'm working on some aspect of my life, and all of our lives are a work in progress, right? So we want to be a better spouse, we want to be a better employee, a better tennis player, whatever it is. And so to the extent that you can show the customer that your product is going to help them to achieve a goal that is central to them, that can be very, very powerful. And sometimes that means, for example, one of the things I talk about in the course, which isn't as obvious, I think, to most people, is linking your brand story to cultural events, to things, important things that are going on in the culture. One obvious example is holidays, like Christmas or Valentine's Day. And I don't have to tell you or your listeners, that's something that many marketers will latch onto, and for good reason. But sometimes we can heighten desire by taking a product that doesn't have that desire attached to it and linking it to something else, whether a holiday or a myth like, say, St. Valentine, what did St. Valentine do? Or sometimes we can be creative and invent an occasion. So I love to tell my students about Cinco de Mayo. They get all excited about Cinco de Mayo because it's an excuse to go out and drink a lot of tequila. But when I ask them, well, do you know why we're celebrating it? Usually they say, well, it was the day that Mexico got its independence or something like that. And I don't know if you know the answer.
You have just watched for free the first 20 minutes of a 1-hour premium episode for our premium members. If you want to watch the rest of this episode and all our future premium episodes, click on the link in the description to sign up as a premium member.